It's time for a reality check.
We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill, and I'm actually going to ask a question before I kick off this episode because Jess and I have quite a significant amount of banter before we actually hit the record button every week. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Our lives are very intertwined and we talk frequently, but like talking on Zoom face to face is totally different. So we tend to like play catch up and like spitball everything and share all our personal professional thoughts and what we learned this week. And did you read
about
that?
Our lives and
anything
other
about
stuff
our lives
too. Yeah.
So my question for you guys that have listened to us in our unhinged moments and our just full education, what do you guys like from a podcast? Because I know there are podcasts that I listen to for education and then podcasts I listen to for strictly entertainment, Call Her Daddy and whatever other pop culture bullshit I can find. Do you guys care? Do you want to hear that and have that little bit of entertainment and then education? We'll tell you what minute the education
for like
starts,
5 to 10 minutes, not like Mind Pump where they talk for an hour before they answer any questions about
but
fitness.
Respect to Mind Pump because they'll say this.
Oh, I'll listen to it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I enjoy it, but again, it's like that's not our goal is not entertainment. However, a lot of times when we're talking about stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, they would love to like literally today. Okay, here's the topic today. I am getting my first ever facial. Like ever. Like I don't do skincare and treatments and all this stuff. So obviously anytime I'm interested in things, I ask Jill about all of them. And I'm getting microneedling done. And I was like, okay, tell me everything. Like, what do I need to do to prepare? And am I going to notice differences in my skin right away? And blah, blah, blah. Right. And then she's going off on all the things that this week that she had done. And I feel like you guys always ask about that stuff. Or like if we're taking, like right now, I am about to add back in BPC and TB 500 peptides for tissue healing and for like gut repair. And we were talking about that. And I'm like, okay, should I add it now or should I add it during this upcoming phase where I'm doing an intentional muscle build, blah, 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 right? Like, so we're talking about it in those contexts. And I'm like, that's the stuff that our listeners also want to hear. It's not like completely irrelevant, but I feel like it's valuable. So anyway, I want to give context.
It's like reality TV when somebody has to have a conversation with someone, but they're like waiting for the upcoming event to like film it and air it. That's like basically what we're doing. It's just waiting for this to have these conversations.
But we do that every week and we don't ever record it. We just don't get to see each other enough when we're always working. So we're always like texting each other and then we finally get to catch up. So
it's like,
tell us your preference. Because if you guys are like, no, we are here to learn, give us the education. Beautiful. We'll just keep doing that. And then we'll keep our unhinged episodes separate out of those education episodes.
Okay.
Great. Give us your feedback.
Question. That's our intro. But today we are going to talk all things hormones. And I know that is a big bucket. As we continue this lab series, which is going to come to a close here soon, this is more on the context of sex hormones and cortisol and stress hormones, because we've done insulin, we've done inflammation, we've done thyroid in the previous episodes of this series. So we want to just dive into hormones specifically. And again, it's a big bucket, but we'll break it down. And as always, I have endless resources on telling you what functional ranges are or optimal ranges for lab markers that you get versus typical conventional, putting in air quotes, normal ranges, and what all of those mean. So you can message me labs on Instagram anytime and I'll send you these resources as well. But let's jump into this. And through this lab series, it's typically a pretty similar scenario of where so many women and individuals are told that things look normal. I think a very typical experience when it comes to hormones is a lot of times this conversation is brought up to sometimes PCP, but even OBGYN. And I think an answer that I've heard women get a lot is that there's no point in testing your hormones because you're on birth control or because you're in peri. And while there is a suppression of your natural hormone production, if you're on birth control specifically, yes, that's not going to give us a full reading, but sex hormones are not just estrogen and progesterone. There is a much larger picture and landscape on this topic. And we'll talk about this, but like a Dutch test, for example, one of the reasons I love that is we're not just looking at the levels of your hormones and are they adequate or in the appropriate range for where you're at in your cycle, but it's also looking at how is your body actually using those hormones, because if your body's not using them effectively, then the levels are kind of irrelevant at that point, right? So blood work is cool because it gives us a snapshot and definitely can give us a lot of information, but we'll talk about the variations with that. So I want to validate anyone listening to this if they've ever had that experience of there's no point in testing your hormones, because even in peri, when hormones are fluctuating, we may not be able to pinpoint that exact moment in your cycle for when labs need to be drawn, but it can still give us context into if you don't feel good, let's take a snapshot in the moment of when you don't feel good and we'll still know why and we can course correct. But something like HRT is absolutely not the first line of defense in any of these hormone conversations, but you might be concerned about your hormones if you're dealing with something like fatigue, PMS, heavy periods, irregular cycles, or amenorrhea, which is non-existent cycles, hair loss, acne, low libido, bloating, craving, poor sleep, anxiety, and mood changes is a big one. Stubborn weight changes, waking up in the middle of the night, just feeling like your body isn't responsive to a lot of things. And again, there's a full picture, right, that we're looking at, but we're just zooming in today on sex hormones and cortisol specifically, and what those patterns look like. So again, normal conventional ranges can miss a lot in these patterns, specifically when it comes to looking at your labs and how you're functioning. And as we've said in every episode, normal is not functional, and we're not looking for or detecting disease like conventional is, and that's its job, and that's great. We're looking at, are we in a functioning range that is optimal for you, for your body to thrive in its environment that it's living in? So that's really what we want to talk about. And another important thing to understand about hormones, I said this, is that HRT is not a first line of defense, right? So hormones are what I call and describe a lot as your check engine light. So when your check engine light goes off in your car, you don't go to the mechanic and say, can you fix my check engine light, right? You go to the mechanic and say, my check engine light is on. Can you tell me what's wrong? Can you diagnose the problem? That is the point with hormones, that we have to look upstream, right? We have to look at where are things going wrong that hormones are now waving the flag or ringing the alarm bells, right? And there are those chemical signals that the body help communicate and adapt to whatever else is going on. And they influence so much inside of the body, but the body is going to prioritize survival before reproduction or fertility, right? So even if you're not trying to conceive, we want your body to act like it does, right? Because that means things are functioning and cycling the way that they're supposed to for a female body with optimal health and signaling and everything underlying. So that is important to understand. And the order that we go in to address these things, again, this is where a lot of women get stuck, because they're like, oh, I'm estrogen dominant, so I need to detox my estrogen. Oh, I'm low progesterone, so I need HRT. Or I'm low testosterone, so I need TRT, right? And again, sometimes those things can take the edge off. But it's really, really important to look at what else is going on inside of the body, because it could be a totally different driver that is leading you to that imbalance or that dysfunction. And we're just kind of slapping a Band-Aid on it. And again, we're not here for symptom relief. We're here to address the problem at its root so that we have a positive feedback loop and a positive cascade of health happening in your body versus just slapping a Band-Aid on any symptom that arises and makes you feel less than yourself, ultimately.
So in terms of the order that we're talking about, obviously if somebody is postmenopausal, we know they may benefit from HRT. However, it doesn't mean that these basics that I'm about to talk about don't also help. So we have had tons and tons of clients who did not go through specific hormonal protocols or testing who noticed really significant symptom improvement with some of these things like night sweats and better sleeping and better libido, and lots of women who have come to us saying, not for fertility, but saying, I've always struggled with infertility. And then they get pregnant during this phase I'm about to talk about. So first, what we're trying to do is build metabolic stability. Okay. So I guess first assess it, but also build metabolic resilience by fueling your body, by adding muscle. These things often create these trickle downs that allow our sex hormones to then be balanced in the way that they ought to be. So a lot of times we see this issue where women who have tended to chronically diet, or even if you're not trying to diet, you're just busy, you're taking care of your kids, you're taking care of your parents, you're like, all of this stuff is going on in life and you're on the go, and we neglect our own health or our own nourishment. First thing, we feed up. We spend 6 months aiming to average more than 2,000 calories a day with plenty of fruits and vegetables and protein. And then we also add muscle mass, which helps us with our insulin sensitivity, right? An analogy that Jill uses a lot that I have taken that I love is, it's like if you have a budget and you only have a certain amount of money coming in, our first priority is to pay the bills, right? We're not going to have fun money for vacations and excess things. Well, that's what happens with our sex hormones when our body is just taking in a little bit and needs to survive, right? Those resources that we're bringing in that help keep us alive are vitamins and minerals and calories. They keep the lights on. Our brain is running. They keep our heart pumping. Reproduction is not necessary for our survival, which is the first most important thing to our body, right? That's a secondary fun money thing, right? So you need the building blocks and the actual resources for that to thrive. So I think that can be very challenging when we do have a society that tends to have more obesity, because women are instructed oftentimes like, well, you need to lose weight, because if you lose weight, then you can get pregnant. And there is some truth to that, because if you have excess body fat, and that makes you less healthy, right? However, if you've been chronically dieting for a year, and you think that weight loss is the only thing that matters, but you're not actually nourishing and taking care of that system, or getting enough quality nutrients within whatever you're eating, reproduction is not going to fire up and have the resources to thrive and flourish.
Yeah. So we want to look at that metabolic stability. We want to look at your thyroid and your nutrient status. And most importantly, we want to look at your gut, your liver, your whole digestive process, and inflammation. Most importantly with sex hormones, and we'll talk about some of these patterns, is your stress. How you manage your stress, and not necessarily in your day-to-day life. To Jess's point, two of the biggest stressors I see, especially with perimenopausal women who come to us symptomatic, are that they are under eating calories and nutrients, right? They're just not getting enough energy for their body to perform effectively and do its job. And the other is that they are intentionally or not fasting. And those long periods of gaps where no food is coming in, your body is going to operate from it's scarcity,
right?
It's a stressor. Your body is like, oh my gosh, we don't have food coming in. And again, it's not always intentional. And a lot of times people use fasting as a way to control their calorie intake, which is fine. But if you have a lot of stress on your body, if your labs are looking a certain way, if you're very symptomatic, if you know your hormones are off, 0 out of 10 don't recommend. Like, we've got to get food in your body, and we've got to do it consistently.
It's also overtraining is a really common one with this population. I find that somebody who is, 28 years old, who's working with us, or even 35 years old, who's working with us and training 4 days a week at a pretty hard intensity, heavy weights, whatever. Okay, cool. We're chilling. We're seeing great progress. For some of my perimenopausal and menopausal clients, intentionally programming more deload weeks into their workout program has astounding benefits. Like, their recovery seems better. Their physical results don't plateau as frequently when they get more active recovery that's planned into their program. More is not always better. So that comes to dieting, but that also comes into play with exercise. So we always talk about the allostatic load and stress buckets, right? We're not only removing the stressors, we also want to add recovery modalities intentionally. Prioritize sleep like it is gold, because that is when our hormones actually do the producing and everything, right? So that's when our body is going to recover and adapt from said stressors. So, yeah, I also feel like, I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like women who already have struggling sex hormone levels tend to be much more positively impacted by whole foods and like more of an anti-inflammatory type diet. So like I have one client, she's incredibly fit, postmenopausal, close to menopausal, super fit, even coming to us. With her, she ate such a great diet in terms of protein, and she's tracked macros. She used to do bodybuilding. As soon as we took out like protein bars and processed versions of these foods and just swapped it for meat, swapped her fiber wraps for fruits and vegetables, instantly it was like, oh, our body's responding more. And again, I've seen this over and over again, but this is more from me anecdotal. I don't know what your experience is with that.
No, I mean, I do. Again, I think that's this population, specifically speaking about perimenopausal, menopausal women, they come from a diet culture based on timing and age of perimenopause typically happening. It was an era of low fat was a thing. Then it was low carb, keto, Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers was all pushed really hard. And they come from a place of significant restriction and very much normalizing lower calorie intake. And with lower calorie intake, you have to be extremely intentional about the foods that you're consuming to fill all the nutrient gaps so your body has the zinc, the selenium, the magnesium, all of these raw materials to thrive.
So you think it's more of a nutrient deficient thing than okay, you're eating too many processed inflammatory foods thing, which is what I was assuming.
Well, I think they're eating too much, so they're creating this inflammatory environment, but it's also that they're not getting enough because they're consuming all the processed things. So I do think over time, absolutely, there's now an inflammatory environment that has been layered on top of this. And
metabolically, they're adapted.
Right.
Metabolically, they're also adapted to lower and lower calories. So at this point, okay, 1700 calories, which should be totally fine. Now your body perceives as a surplus because you've been eating at 1200 for 30 years. Like,
yeah. And I also think that, it's funny. I hosted a webinar last night and I asked this question, and I always like to ask this question to really give an eye-opening experience to these women is, when is the last time you intentionally ate 2000 plus calories? Like you woke up and that was your target to eat that. And all of them were like, never in my entire life have I woken up and said, I am going to be eating this much food, right? Typically their responses were like, only if I'm stressed, if I'm emotional. Yeah. If I'm in like fuck it mode. That's the problem, is that we have these massive calorie injections, but we're still very nutrient deficient. So we're now layering in still a lack of nutrients. You are eating in this massive surplus when you're metabolically adapted at a lower intake. And it's usually these indulgent foods, right, that are going to create an environment that's even more inflammatory. So, and then you're like, holy cow, I bloat when I look at bread. And it's because of all of these things. It's the metabolic adaptation. It's this inflammatory environment. And also, when you restrict foods for a long time, there's a physiological piece to that where your body's literally not used to it, right? So digestion is slower.
At first, you will bloat until you start to become more accustomed to digesting that much fiber and all of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many pieces that go into it.
It's so interesting because like bodybuilders know this. That's the only population I can think of where women are like, oh yeah, I've intentionally eaten 25, 26, 3,000 calories, right? Because, but they know, oh, that does, if I am doing the right inputs in terms of my protein and my nutrients and my training, that doesn't equal, oh, I'm going to become heavy set and be uncomfortable in my clothes, right? It equals, oh, now I can sculpt this physique. And right, like there are so many positive health benefits to both sides. But again, culturally, we keep being conditioned that lighter is better. Less on that scale is better. That doesn't mean healthier just because it's lower. Sorry for my little tangent there. So back to hormones, blood work.
Yeah, so blood work versus a Dutch test. So a Dutch test is a dried urine test, and blood work is obviously you go to labbing and get your blood drawn. So they answer different questions realistically. Blood work is obviously a snapshot of like what is circulating in the bloodstream at the time the sample is taken. And obviously that's incredibly valuable for a lot of the markers that we do look at, right? When you're getting a CBC, when we're looking at your lipids, we're looking at your thyroid. Those are the things that we want to know. And obviously that gives us a lot of context to the body's current state, especially correlated with your symptoms. But the Dutch test is essentially taking dried urine samples across a day. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, later in the day, and then right before bed, sometimes middle of the night, if you are waking up, because that's going to give us insight into hormones, specifically cortisol at that time, if you are waking up in the middle of the night. And it's
we're going to
also
see those trends versus the single snapshot. We're able to see trends over time. And both of these, if you are having regular cycles, we prefer for both of these to be taken at a specific time during your luteal phase when progesterone tends to be highest. So that, again, okay, now we have more information because all of these hormones fluctuate throughout a month. So we're not expecting, if you get blood work done on a random day, I'm not going to freak out and say, okay, this is too high or too low. It matters when it was drawn.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So when we're taking that typically on a 28 to 30 day normal regular cycle, we're going to look around day 19 to 21, about 5 to 7 days after ovulation. And again, we want to catch it at its highest if we can, so that if it's not peaking, then we know why, right? And we know that piece of the puzzle, but also we know, if someone is ovulating, because if it didn't get to a certain point, then we can see that, right? So we're looking at all of those pieces of the puzzle. And to Jess's point, if I get your cortisol on your blood work and you do it fasted before 9 a.m. or so, that's really helpful, but cortisol fluctuates throughout the whole day, right? So you could be normal at that point, but you could be sky high at night when it should be lower, or you could be really high in the afternoon. So that rhythm is super important. And how it's changing throughout the day. So blood work is obviously very foundational, but it's a good layer.
I don't know how detailed you want to get into the Dutch test, but I think it is absolutely fascinating. So I have a family history of breast cancer. I don't have the BRCA gene, but my mom, my aunt, like a lot of close women in my life have had breast cancer. And I got a Dutch test really to proactively see which pathways. My mom's breast cancer was ER/PR positive, so estrogen dominant, essentially, estrogen and progesterone. If I look at my Dutch test, it actually shows me, oh, my body processes, like methylizes estrogen in the desirable, more healthy pathway versus this other one that is a little bit less healthy and more correlated to things like hormonal based cancers and stuff. So I got it for that informational reason. Now, if it said, oh, actually, your body processes estrogen in this other way, there are supplements and stuff that I could add in as a preventative measure to help my body process and clear estrogen better. So it's not only a snapshot of like, okay, what's happening this month or this day during your period. It also shows you some pretty cool stuff about how your body breaks down these different hormones.
Yeah, so there are actually 3 types of estrogens. So there's E1, E2, E3, estrone, estradiol, which is the most potent and active, and then estriol. So there are 3 types of estrogens. So there's different activity with that. And then on the Dutch test, we're looking at the actual metabolism. There's a bathtub analogy that's really helpful for this. So production of E1, E2, and E3 is the water filling the tub. Phase 1 detox is, are we choosing the right drain? Like which path is the estrogen traveling down in the liver, essentially? Phase 2 detox is the drain pipe. So that's the methylation and the packaging for removal. And then phase 3 detox is getting it out, right? Excreting it via stool or urine. So you can see why all 3 of those phases are super important. And let's say a phase 3 is blocked, right? Constipation, poor gut health, high beta glucuronidase, which is an enzyme you can see on a stool test. The tub is going to overflow and that estrogen is going to recirculate in your body, which can present as an estrogen dominant pattern, which we'll talk about. So we have to work through that in there. And then the three pathways on the Dutch test that we can see, again, phase 1 primarily happens in the liver. E1 and E2 are then broken down into these three metabolite pathways. So to Jess's point, there's, and we're not going to get too granular and scientific with this, but the protective pathway is the one obviously that we prefer estrogen to go down. Then there's a more dangerous genotoxic pathway that we don't want majority of estrogen to go down, which to Jess's point, seeing breast cancer precursors, I think is incredibly valuable. And I don't know why this isn't a standard test across the board for women's health, especially. And then there's the blue, the third pathway, 16-OH. So there's three different pathways, and that tells us how the body is, again, metabolizing and detoxing and breaking all of this down. And that's incredibly important to know because, again, are we getting enough is one question. And then how is our body using it? And then how is our body getting rid of it? And we need to really understand that full picture
also
to know how healthy it is.
This is aside this particular topic, but it also shows things like neurotransmitter production and stuff. Like mine showed, hello, your body is like not producing very much dopamine on its own because I'm in these constant dopamine seeking behavior loops, right? So, okay, I can look at this and I can say, oh shit, okay, my cortisol is jacked up because I'm looking at screens late at night, and then my dopamine is low, so I should probably stop these other things. And like, it gives you patterns that you can then apply in your behaviors. I say that again to say information is only information, right? What are we then doing with that information? This test is not an answer in itself. It gives you another puzzle piece to the full picture of health.
Yeah, those organic acids is another, and the neurotransmitters and the metabolites are another important piece of the puzzle on the Dutch test that I find incredibly valuable. I do have a family history of breast cancer, so I get a Dutch test at least twice a year for myself. Fortunately, mine tends to metabolize pretty well for someone who genetically does not detox very well, and I got actual genetic testing to confirm that, but that's why that's important for me to get so that I can see that picture. So that's not to that's to just give you a really clear picture of how helpful a Dutch test can be in this context. But again, to reiterate, even if we look at your Dutch test and see that your body is less efficient at metabolizing and clearing things out, and whatever the case is, that's still not our first line of defense. Because if you remember, I said earlier, the order of operations is important and the hormones are a downstream problem. So when we do a lot of this liver work, gut work, lifestyle work, are you eating enough? Are you getting enough nutrients? Adding in strength training, adding in recovery, sleep, yada, yada, all the important things. This tends to course correct on its own. But it, again, is incredibly valuable information to see, all right, what's actually going on here. So then when we're looking at these hormonal patterns, a lot of times I think estrogen gets a bad reputation, and estrogen's not bad. It supports our brain, our bones, our skin, our cardiovascular health, our tissue, our libido, our cognition, our metabolism, the regulation of cycle, right? And then progesterone is produced after ovulation by something called the corpus luteum. And again, I'm not trying to get too granular here, but it supports the luteal phase, sleep, mood, nervous system, thyroid, and it balances against estrogen. So progesterone is a marker of ovulation quality. So a woman can have her cycle every month and still not ovulate effectively. She can also ovulate and have a weak luteal phase still with lower progesterone output overall. Low progesterone tends to show up as PMS, anxiety, irritability, breast tenderness, spotting during your luteal, really short cycles, sleep disruption, in the days leading up to your cycle, even fatigue, water retention, low libido, headaches. And again, progesterone supplementally can be really helpful for some women, but it doesn't address the reason why progesterone is low. Typically, or a lot of times, it's a downstream problem of stress, of undereating, of low thyroid signaling, inflammation, poor sleep, overtraining, or obviously perimenopause is just another bucket. One thing to understand, and again, not to get too in the weeds with this, but your adrenals produce cortisol, right? In stressful periods. When you are chronically stressed and the body is just pumping out cortisol in response to all of the stressors it's experiencing, it's not endless, right? At some point that it gets tired of doing it, basically. There's something called a progesterone steal. So cortisol and your adrenals will steal the progesterone, so then your levels look low. So again, understanding managing stress is super important, but understanding why is progesterone low, you can see why supplementing progesterone might be silly if you are pumping out cortisol and you're really, really stressed and you're under eating and you're not sleeping and life is hard and whatever. Cool. Like the supplementing of progesterone can take the edge off, but we're not addressing why progesterone is low. So having that full context and that full picture is super important to know how everything is being manipulated internally, health wise.
And we talked about this when it comes to labs in our last podcast about inflammation. But if you are in the middle of a protocol or in the middle of these shifts, you likely will notice changes in your cycle and in your symptoms. That doesn't necessarily mean, oh no, something's wrong or I'm going in the wrong direction. I had a client recently who, as we were just going through her normal build phase, like we haven't done labs or anything like that, she started experiencing all these benefits in terms of symptoms and cognitive, like brain function and energy and all this stuff. But then she started getting headaches, and like her cycle was a different length than it typically is, just for 2 months. And she's like, oh no, is something happening here? And I'm like, I think your body's just like producing your hormones the way it's supposed to. And there's this period of, okay, it doesn't know what to do with that because it's not used to having this during the drop off at the end of her cycle. Like for her, these headaches are happening within the first 2 days of her cycle when estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest. After like 2 or 3 months, she's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Now I have less PMS symptoms. I don't have those headaches anymore. Now my timing has leveled out. And we see this over and over and over again. That is one specific example, but we've seen it where people might miss a cycle for a month. And then, okay, now after that, it starts to get better. And now they don't have cramps like they used to have before. Again, if you are in the middle of a transition in anything, expect some sort of, again, it depends on every single case. They're all different, but expect there might be disruption before there's a leveling out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the context of low progesterone, one of the most common patterns among women that we see is estrogen dominance. Now, estrogen dominance means that estrogen is at a higher ratio to progesterone than we'd like to see. You could still have low progesterone and low estrogen and still be estrogen dominant, because that is speaking about the relationship of those two hormones to each other. So it can mean estrogen's high. It can mean progesterone is low relative to estrogen. It can mean both hormones are low, but progesterone is just a lot lower. It can mean estrogen clearance is poor. It can mean estrogen is being recirculated because the gut is not eliminating well. So again, symptoms and labs are super important. Estrogen dominant symptoms are similar to what I described with low progesterone, meaning PMS, breast tenderness, heavy periods, maybe more clotting in your cycle, bloating, water retention, headaches, irritability, mood swings. You can have histamine-like symptoms, or just worse symptoms right before your cycle. But we have to look upstream at what is getting us to this point. I think one of the most common ones that I see, at least in our clients, is poor liver clearance, constipation. So toxins and excess hormones are not getting cleared out effectively. Sluggish bile flow, and then alcohol. Alcohol consumption, I'm not going to normalize it or tell you it's healthy in any scenario. It doesn't mean I don't do it once in a while socially, but in the context of estrogen, I think that's important to understand. And then stress, hypothyroid, low progesterone, poor ovulation, all of those things can lead to estrogen dominance. So on blood work, we want to look at estradiol and progesterone together. Again, there's E1, E2, and E3. Typically on a blood panel, you'll see total estrogens and estradiol sometimes. That doesn't necessarily give you the full picture on blood work, but the cool thing is you can take total estrogens and subtract the estradiol if you do have that marker being drawn, and at least get an idea of what that ratio looks like and what the rest is made up of among your total estrogens. But the Dutch is really going to give you the full picture of the levels of all three, and then the pathways that and how we're metabolizing everything effectively.
And this is also important to understand the ratio between them if you're somebody who is menopausal and looking for HRT, right? Some doctors will be like, oh yeah, here's some estradiol. And it's like, well, time out. Shouldn't we want a combo of progesterone and estrogen? And or a provider who does test regularly so that they can see how your body is responding. And again, they might be able to assume a lot based on your symptoms. But then the labs can help verify, are we bumping up the right things in the right amounts?
Yep. And then if we're looking at cortisol patterns and just your body's overall stress response, again, cortisol is not, it's demonized on the internet. Cortisol is essential to our body's function, and it helps us regulate blood sugar, blood pressure, inflammation, immune response, energy availability, our circadian rhythm, and the stress.
We have a coach on our team, and I love this, and everybody calls it the stress hormone. I've heard her call it the sunshine hormone. And that's really what it is. Like, it helps with our circadian rhythm. And when we wake up, our cortisol is supposed to go higher. And then it's supposed to taper down as the day goes on. And then our melatonin it ramps up so that we're ready for bedtime, right? So again, just because it's high during one time of your day does not mean that that's a bad thing. That might be great, right? If it's during the right time. So anyway, we just want it to regulate in terms of the rhythm it's supposed to have.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? So cortisol and melatonin have an inverse relationship to each other. So as melatonin's going up at night when it's time to be sleepy, cortisol goes down, and then vice versa. When melatonin goes down before when the sun's coming up and morning is coming, then cortisol should rise effectively. And that's, the rhythm throughout the day is that cortisol is up and then slowly drifts down through the day. So again, a snapshot of your cortisol in the morning can be helpful, but it doesn't really give us the full picture. And again, if we take a snapshot and your cortisol is really high in the morning, that's cool, but we're not going to go take something to lower cortisol because we want to know why. And typically, if we work on nutrients and calories and sleep and regulation, that's gonna work itself out. But if we look, and again,
just because it spikes in the morning doesn't mean, like for my example I gave from my own Dutch a couple years ago, mine looks great during the day. My problem is it then spikes again at 9 p.m. when I should be going to sleep, right? Like that's problematic. Or for a lot of women, okay, it's spiking at 2 a.m. and they're waking up before the sun comes up. So the pattern matters, not just the one thing.
Yeah.
Should we talk about ashwagandha or like things that can be generally speaking helpful? Or like, should we talk about any interventions to this or just stick to the labs for now?
The most helpful thing is going to be sunshine to regulate for this.
True.
Sunshine
at appropriate times, and then not having blue lights late at night. Like, right, we want to train our brain to follow its natural rhythm.
Mm-hmm. And people with we have clients that come to us on sleep medications or diagnose like sleep dysfunction of some kind, and typically when we get them eating enough and we work on some regulation and we minimize or mitigate blue light exposure at night, or at least cut it off earlier, and get sunshine in the eyeballs in the morning when you wake up to tell your system, hey, it's morning, daytime, and regulate that biological clock, poof, they don't need medication long term. And I'm not saying that we fix that and solve all your problems, but it really, really is a major factor. And
going back to the basics, which we always do, it's like these same things that our body, the cycles our body was built to go on. If we go back to that, wow, everything starts to balance.
And it's so important. And then understanding too with cortisol, it's the same thing on the Dutch test that I think is really helpful, is that we have our levels and our rhythm that we can see, but is your body, like, how is your body clearing it or using it effectively? And then knowing with cortisol and adrenal dysfunction, high cortisol is actually an earlier stage. If that progresses long term, speaking to myself, this is my health flaw that I've been working on for a long time, is that I tend to actually run low and my cortisol clearance sucks. So my levels are technically, the reading is high, but I'm chronically running low and on fumes because my body has this recirculation of cortisol. So my levels look high, but my pattern looks low, but my clearance is crap, right? So that's been my pattern for a long time. So again, there's so many pieces to this. And then there's the cortisone aspect as well. And cortisone is made directly from cortisol in the kidneys, in the colon, in the salivary glands, and then it's converted back to cortisol in the liver. Free cortisone in the urine reflects the free cortisol that entered the kidneys and was converted before excretion. So there's obviously you can see there's a lot of variables that go into this. You could have high cortisol and low cortisone, or vice versa, or normal one and high or low on the other. So we have to be able to understand and recognize those patterns. But again, we're always going to go back to the basics when it's time to regulate. The variable might be that, again, we're going through the same order of operations for everybody. Is the liver able to do its job? Is the gut able to do its job? Can we go through these functions effectively? Then we'll layer in symptom or supplements for symptoms, right? So if you are sky high cortisol late at night, we might layer in an adaptogen like ashwagandha or rhodiola, or a specific supplement that is designed to help lower cortisol. Or on the opposite end, if you're
rhodiola, I might do rhodiola in the morning, but ashwagandha in the evening to lower it. Also, carbs, that's something that I often recommend for, again, the same population of peri and postmenopausal women who wake up in the middle of the night. If it is waking up because of a cortisol spike, and again, you can test this. You can experiment with this without needing to go get labs. Try having carbs before bed. And again, this is a population that has been told carbs are bad, cut all carbs, and don't eat past 7 p.m. and this and that. A lot of times you could add a bowl of oats with berries or something at night, and wow, now I'm sleeping through the night a little bit better. So that is an easy one we can layer in.
Yeah, carbs and cortisol have an inverse relationship. So it is really helpful. And also you can, knowing that if you are a low carb person, you can see why that is a stressor on the body over time. And then you are just, people always say, well, what about in peri and menopause based on all the advice you get? All the advice I give is just that much more important for perimenopause. You need carbs that much more. It's not like, oh, you're in peri, so it's different. It's all the same rules, right? You're just that much more susceptible to these. The impact is heavier, and you're more susceptible and prone to this impact because of the fluctuation or lowering of sex hormones due to something completely out of our control and just part of life, right? So yeah, that's super important to understand the rhythm, the timing, the production, the clearance, the full cycle. But again,
cortisol is stress. We're talking about stress here. So this goes right back to what we said earlier. Make sure you're eating enough calories every day. Make sure you're not overtraining. Make sure your recovery is prioritized versus just working yourself into the ground every day. All of these things are so important.
And then with perimenopause, that really changes the hormones conversation, because it's not just a slow decline of hormone production over time. It's a big period of fluctuation for a long time, where one day you might feel super symptomatic and another day you feel totally fine, or completely different symptoms. The hormones fluctuate before they drop. And I think a lot of people don't realize that perimenopause is a long period of time. I mean, it could be 10 years of somebody from starting perimenopause to postmenopause. So knowing that, I think, is important too before the decline.
Also, we didn't really put in our notes a whole lot about physique and metabolism when it comes to this life period. And I feel like that is an often debated topic where women are like, well, no, I can't gain muscle, or I can't get fit, or I can't speed up my metabolism because of my age. Could it possibly be harder for you? Yes. But oftentimes, all of the research shows that that's because of the prior inputs, and because of our behaviors changing over time, not because of age alone. So if we can put on more muscle mass, great. now you will actually have better, you can still put on, have good physique outcomes. Typically the people that we see poor physique outcomes from are the ones who have been chronically dieting for years and years. Their daily activity input has gotten lower and lower. They have declined in their muscle to fat mass ratio over time. So all of those basics still apply, but they're noticing it around that time of their life as it's correlated to this other stuff, because it's just been accumulating for 40, 50 years at this point. So now you're starting to see it, right? It's not because magically when you turn 50 years old, you can't lose weight anymore.
Yep. So that's a good point for the physique side of things. So again, all of the advice and recommendations we give are just that much more important when you're in this period where you are more susceptible to these things. But the best thing you can do is eat enough food, get enough nutrients, get enough carbs, lift weights and build muscle, and make sure that you're not symptomatic so you sleep.
And for your bone density too. As we go into menopause, our bone density, along with our muscle mass, starts declining, right? So anything you can do now, no matter what age you are, to put on muscle, and lifting really, really heavy, like powerlifting type low rep ranges, think 3 to 6 reps heavy, is one of the best things you can do for your bone density too, because once you get to that period, okay, how much did I store up before this? Because at this point, it's going to decline with age. So do everything in your power to build muscle at no matter what your age is, right?
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, in peri and menopause, the body just has less tolerance for the same stressors it used to kind of compensate for. So just understanding that impact, and the work is just more than worrying about estrogen and progesterone. It's about that metabolic health and recovery and sleep and inflammation and just overall health. We know that lower estrogen and progesterone are expected through the menopausal process, but that doesn't necessarily mean dysfunction or symptoms. We just have to kind of optimize around that. And we have clients that certainly end up more impacted by this life change and do pursue HRT for life and quality of life, and that's great. And there are other clients who aren't symptomatic and don't feel super impacted by it and don't need HRT. And there's no playbook that everyone follows, right? It's really so individual for each person.
So we are going to split this episode into 2 also. We still want to cover like testosterone and go over all of the specific functional labs and all of that good stuff. So this is part 1, but come back next week for part 2 of the sex hormone conversation.
And that's all for this episode, and we'll see you guys next time.